Hello, everyone. So today we have chapter 15, the lymphoid system, and we're going to talk about immunity. Okay, so this is a big one as well. It's pretty cool, actually. I think it's really interesting, but has a lot of probably some bio vocab that maybe you've heard of or you kind of remember. So we're in chapter 15. You want to follow me, right? Let's do this. So the concept of immunity. So we're talking about our body needing to combat against anything foreign, anything that wants to take over our body, any pathogen. Pathogen is something foreign that wants to cause some harm on our body. So when we talk about immunity, we talk about the ability of us to protect ourselves against those pathogens, against those antigens that are coming against us. We have resistance. We have what's called susceptibility. So that's like how susceptible you are to really getting sick due to a pathogen going into your body or the lack of immunity. And basically, when we talk about immunity, we have the two main types. We have innate immunity and adaptive immunity. So we have innate, which are we're born with, and then we have adaptive, which is something we get throughout our life. We're talking about the B cells, T cells, antibodies, and things like that. When we talk about innate, we talk about our first line of defense, kind of layers that protect us from those pathogens, kind of like our skin, kind of like our earwax, our boogers, things like that. So we talk about innate, which is non-specific, and we have adaptive, which is specific. So just splitting those words, non-specific means it doesn't fight against one specific pathogen, like it's a general protection. That's why it's called non-specific. And when you talk about adaptive or specific, that means we have specific defenses against those specific pathogens. Say, think about a virus, think about a specific type of bacteria. So we specifically target those, okay, not in general, but more direct to that pathogen, okay? So when we talk about immunity, we have what's called the lymphoid system, okay, and that has four big elements. We have the lymph plasma, which is a little lymph liquid that has all our cells that are fighting whatever is coming into our body. We have the lymphatic vessels, kind of how we have veins and arteries. Think about blood vessels, but now we have lymphatic vessels, so that's where that liquid is going to go through. We have specific structures and organs that have what are called lymphocytes, so those cells that are fighting. And then we have the red bone marrow, which is also the production site of many of these cells that we need to fight. So that's our lymphoid system. And we also have, if you remember, the interstitial kind of fluid. That's kind of similar to our lymph plasma that we're talking about. Okay. So let's get going. So here is kind of a picture of kind of our lymphoid system, kind of all those areas. So I got my textbook here as well, and I don't want to miss any areas. Okay. Um, okay. So we can see through the green. It's a little small, but I have it in my textbook. We have our kind of in the middle. You'll see the thymus, kind of right here in the middle. Right here on your right side, probably left side of this person, you'll have the spleen coming out. Remember, we have our red bone marrow that's kind of inside that bone. We have different nodes. So all these nodes are kind of areas where all those pathogens will kind of be directed to through the fluid, and right there is when we're going to break them out, eat them, and kind of get rid of them. So we have different nodes, lymphatic vessels, thoracic duct, so another passageway. Uh, what else do we have? Axillary node. Here's our aggregating lymphoid nodule. So we have these little nodules as well. Our small intestine, iliac node, inguinal node, and we'll get into those a little bit. But that's kind of like the you know how when we saw like a picture like that with the blood vessels. So this is with the lymphoid system and all its lymph vessels and all its structures. Okay? So the biggest ones I believe will be our spleen and our thymus. Okay. So those functions of the lymphoid system. So what are the main jobs of that system? Is to drain excess interstitial fluid, to transport dietary lipids, and to carry out our main immune responses. Okay. So we need when we have that interstitial fluid, we need to kind of drain it out, clean it out, get rid of those pathogens, and return it back into the blood. So that's kind of one of the biggest purposes. Transport a lot of those lipids back to their vessels where they're supposed to go, and then through that system, we have specific immune responses to antigens. We create B cells, we create antibodies, we create T cells in different organs and different parts. So B cells and T cells are the main ones that are going to be fighting against our anything foreign that's coming into our body. Okay. We also have allergens. Okay. So kind of when we talk about allergens, those are like antigens that are coming in or foreign chemicals that are creating some immune response. So we think about anaphylactic reactions. So we have this anaphylactic shock that will kind of help stop or prevent those allergic reactions that we're getting, that our body starts trying to combat some chemical that really isn't that harmful to us. So, but our body kind of they think it is, or they kind of identify it as a foreign substance that's trying to cause some harm to our body. So we get these allergic reactions throughout. Okay. So lymphatic vessels and the lymph plasma circulation. So let's get into the flow of this liquid, or this lymphatic liquid, through the lymphatic vessels. Okay, so we have what are called lymphatic capillaries. So they are closed at one end, so they're kind of like blood capillaries, but basically when they finish, they're closed at that end, and then you return it. They don't really continue throughout. We have what are called our lymphatic nodes. Okay, so they are containing different sections throughout our body. They have some B cells, they have some T cells. They're the ones that where the liquid's going to get in there, and in those nodes, we'll get into some pictures. It's going to be that cleaning and that eating and digesting those pathogens. Okay. Then we have tissues that will lack those capillaries. So they're not everywhere on every single type of specific tissue. So they're in different parts of our body, as we saw in the picture before. But you have areas where there's cartilage, the epidermis, and the cornea of the eye where we don't have those lymphatic capillaries. There's some areas around the spleen and red bone marrow. Okay, so here's a couple pictures. Okay. So here we can see blood capillaries. So we can see a venule here on the left in blue, right? We can see deoxygenated blood, so it's blue. We have an arterial, which is oxygenated blood, which is red. See our blood coming through. And then in between there we have those lymphatic capillaries. And as you can see, here's like a little end that's coming out, right? And we have this interstitial fluid, so this fluid in between the spaces, okay, that's going around. So just how there's filtration through the capillaries, if you remember, just how there's filtration to get oxygen, to give oxygen, to get CO2, to kind of filter the blood. We have filtration of those lymphatic capillaries as well, as you see here on the right, and kind of the filtering and getting of those pathogens throughout into our lymphatic capillaries to kind of get them to those nodes and kind of clean them out. Okay. So we have different lymphatic trunks and ducts throughout our body. Okay, all around. We have we have our lumbar trunks. So there's different ones. For example, we got lumbar trunks that will drain our lower limbs. Okay, the wall, kind of the pelvis area, the kidneys, kind of the area. We have the intestinal trunk, which will drain kind of like the stomach, the intestines, the pancreas, the spleen, the liver. So when we're talking about those trunks, it's kind of like those bigger vessels, kind of a little thicker, where that liquid is going to go through. So that each section has its own trunk, which will kind of get liquid from those areas around it. Okay. We talk about bronchomediastinal trunk. We have about thoracic wall, the lungs, and kind of the heart. Subclavian, right? So we got like kind of the upper limbs, and we have jugular trunks, kind of the head and the neck, so kind of going around. Then we have the thoracic duct, and then so that's a big one, and then the right lymphatic duct that are gonna kind of go through. So the right lymphatic duct will kind of be the upper right side of the body. The thoracic duct will kind of be like the left lymphatic duct or the left side of the body. Okay. So here's kind of our routes of that drainage of that lymph plasma through the veins. So as you can see, here's our right brachiocephalic vein coming in here, jugular vein is coming around. So, but you see in between there, kind of that little green, we have the right jugular trunk, the right subclavian trunk kind of coming through as well. So the liquid all around those areas near those veins is going to go in through those specific areas to kind of get drained and get cleaned out and get rid of those pathogens that are coming around. On the bottom we have our right lumbar trunk as well, left lumbar trunk, different areas. Okay, here's a little more of a close-up, the right internal jugular vein, and you see kind of those lymphatic vessels kind of coming around and getting close to it, kind of getting rid. Remember, this blood, what does this blood have? So it doesn't have oxygen anymore, and it kind of came with some CO2, but you never know if throughout those veins we have other nutrients that were absorbed through those capillary absorptions that we need to kind of drain through and get rid of and kind of clean out through that blood, so because it's coming back into our heart, right? So we want that clean blood. Okay, whew. I don't think it's gonna be that long, so we'll see how it goes. But so we got formation and flow of that lymph plasma. So most components of that blood plasma will filter freely through those walls, kind of to form that little interstitial fluid in between. More fluid will filter out of those blood capillaries. So kind of out, then will return through reabsorption. So we're always kind of cleaning out more than we're actually putting back in. That excess filter fluid will drain into those lymphatic vessels, and it will then become some lymph plasma. And those proteins are kind of too large. So a lot of plasma proteins are too big to leave that blood vessel. Okay. Let's see. Try not to miss anything from our book. Each day, about 3 liters of interstitial fluid drains into our lymphatic capillaries to turn into that blood plasma. Okay. Proteins that do leave our blood plasma can't return to the blood directly by diffusion. They can move through the lymphatic capillaries and into the plasma again. And one of the biggest functions of those lymphatic vessels is to return that lost plasma proteins into that bloodstream. Okay. So here's kind of a little bit of an image, the relationship with the lymphoid system and the cardiovascular system. Okay, so if you kind of, I don't know, where we can start at the bottom. So our blood plasma is filtered through those capillaries, right? So we're talking about that little filtering through there into those interstitial fluid, are kind of around there. Those lymphatic capillaries will absorb that fluid and pass the lymph plasma to the efferent lymphatic vessels that are going through. Then we have our lymph nodes that are going to remove those foreign substances, clean out the lymph plasma, phagocytosis, kind of eating through immune reactions. We'll go through the, again, efferent lymphatic vessels. We got some valves in there, so there's more valves on these vessels than there are on the veins to make sure everything's going one way. So kind of once it's cleaned out, it keeps going upward where it's supposed to. And then those lymphatic ducts will empty that plasma into kind of like the jugular subclavian veins and back into our cardiovascular system. So instead of this fluid, kind of dirty fluid coming through just the veins and back to the heart, we have this filtration system that's going to kind of clean it out, rinse it out a little bit, and then return it back to where it's supposed to go. So if you talk about, we're looking here at the pulmonary areas, a similar system here, pulmonary blood vessel, systemic blood capillaries, kind of filtration going through, lymphatic capillaries, lymph nodes over here near the lungs. Okay, so we got some lymphoid organs and tissues. We have what are primary lymphoid organs, and we have what are secondary lymphoid organs. Okay, so when we talk about primary lymphoid organs, is kind of the places where those stem cells will divide and kind of will be able or become capable of creating an immune response. So kind of like the biggest, most important area to create that immune response for those cells to actually work and start their functions. Okay. So these organs, we have red bone marrow, we have the thymus, we got B and T cells that are immature and that are being produced. And then the secondary lymphoid organs, that's when we have our lymph nodes, our spleen, and lymphatic nodules. That's where the main response occurs. Okay, so we'll start with the thymus. Thymus is this organ that's here kind of in the middle, between the sternum and the aorta, kind of like in between, over here in our chest. So it has this capsule, it has what's called trabeculae, has some lobules, and it has a cortex. And then, so basically in that thymus, we have these immature T cells that will migrate from our red bone marrow to that cortex of the thymus. They will proliferate, so kind of they will evolve or develop and begin to mature into those cells that we need for immune response. Okay, so it's kind of like the production sites. So those are the primary lymphoid organs, kind of the production sites. And we have what are called nodular dendritic cells as well. So I think there's a couple of pictures. Yes, we'll get into those pictures. But these epithelial cells in the cortex will have some long processes that surround and serve as framework to make those T cells. Those epithelial cells help pre-T cells mature into T cells. So they're pre-T cells. They really aren't ready to do the T cell job yet. We have a process called apoptosis that happens throughout. So that's basically just programmed cell death. So it's kind of like cell suicide almost. We also have thymic macrophages that will help clear out any dead cells or dying cells that are through there to kind of clean them out and make sure we produce the right T cells and that are mature. Those right T cells are maturing, and those surviving T cells will enter the medulla, and then we'll go to their secondary lymphoid organs to initiate our immune response. Okay, and then we have what are called thymic corpuscles, which we'll get into right now. So here is a picture. Here's the chest, kind of. Here's a thymus in between the lungs, kind of like on top of the heart, almost near the aorta, kind of. Here's the superior vena cava, so that's kind of like the location. So we're looking at about the structure of that thymus. So we have the capsule kind of around it. We have the cortex, thymic corpuscle, and the medulla right in the middle. Okay. So the outer cortex has T cells, dendritic cells, epithelial cells. So kind of all around this cortex over here. Then in the medulla, we have mature T cells, epithelial cells as well, dendritic cells, macrophages, and those thymic corpuscles, which are these little fellows right here. You can see here on the right. Okay. Right. Okay. We also have what are called those lymph nodes. Okay, so once we talk about thymus already, kind of, thymus is kind of the production of those T cells, and we have what are called the lymph nodes. Okay, so those are kind of like bean-shaped structures that they're called. So they look like a little bean. Okay, there's about 600 of those, and they have what's called the capsular extensions called trabeculae. It will divide the node into different sections, and there, as we'll see in a picture, it has a stroma. And the parenchyma of a lymph node will also be divided kind of into superficial cortex and deep medulla. In that lymph nodes, we have that inner cortex, a medulla, afferent lymphatic vessels. We have some sinuses, and we have the efferent lymphatic vessels and the hilum. So these are kind of just structures of it, but let's get into a picture of it and kind of talk about a little bit of them. So we can start. I think the biggest one will be here at the bottom. So we have the route of the lymph plasma flow through a lymph node. So we have the afferent lymphatic vessels that will start, and then the subscapular sinus, trabecular sinus, medullary sinus, and then the efferent. Okay, so we talk about these afferents. So it's kind of where it's coming into. See these valves, so nothing comes back out. So kind of afferent lymphatic vessels. Okay, so it's coming in. That plasma is coming in through those afferents to the subscapular sinus. Okay, so you can see up here, that first little layer, to the trabecular sinus, to the medullar sinus, kind of more in the middle, and then back to the efferent lymphatic vessel, which is coming back out. Again, a valve in there so it doesn't come back in. Okay, so here's kind of a cool little picture of a inguinal. I feel like this always looks like plankton, kind of like being pulled up from the side. But here's a little inguinal lymph node kind of here in the bottom. There's a little portion of that medullary sinus of that lymph node. Here's our trabecula, inner cortex, medullary sinus. Okay. Okay. So it's kind of like the flow of that lymph plasma kind of going through. So I think one of the biggest things will be kind of here our little flow from the afferent, subscapular, trabecular, medullary, and then efferent. Okay, then we're going to talk about the spleen. So the spleen is the largest single mass of lymphatic tissue in our body. So it has what's called a white pulp, which is lymphoid tissue that contains mainly macrophages and lymphocytes. That's what it's called, white pulp. Kind of around central arteries, and it's mainly where B cells and T cells will carry out their immune response, and then those macrophages will kind of eat or phagocytize those bloodborne pathogens that are there. Then we also have the red pulp, which contains a lot of those venous sinuses filled with blood and splenic cords, and it will kind of like its main function is will phagocytosis of those ruptured, worn out red blood cells, white blood cells and platelets. There's also storage of those platelets, something that's what it's called the red pulp, and the production of blood cells during fetal development. Okay. So here's kind of like an anatomy of our spleen. So as you can see here in the middle, here's our stomach kind of, descending colon, kind of like the pancreas, splenic artery over here, splenic vein. See how it's a little darker, a little lighter. So that's why we name it blue, kind of color it blue. Okay. So splenic artery, splenic vein. You can see that through the internal structure, a little of that blood coming out. We have our red pulp, venous sinus, splenic cord, and we have our white pulp, kind of when you see it white, and then you kind of see the red one around it. Okay, and then we also have what are called the lymphoid nodules. Okay, so they're kind of like egg-shaped kind of masses of that lymphoid tissue that are not enclosed by a capsule. They have their small scattered little groups throughout our body. Okay, they are located in the lamina of mucosal membranes called MALT, mucosa-associated lymphatic tissue. So kind of like little membranes, lymph nodes and those little membranes. Okay, large aggregations of those kind of lymph nodes will be our tonsils, aggregated lymphatic follicles or Peyer's patches in the ileum and kind of in the appendix as well. So we got these areas of this accumulation of that lymphoid tissue. Okay, so we have the pharyngeal tonsils, palatine tonsils, tonsillar fossa, lingual tonsils, and the crypts. So different areas where we have these lymphoid nodules. So these are the tonsils. Okay. So those tonsils mainly, if they're going to be full of this lymphoid tissue, their main function is to protect against those invasion of foreign substances in that area, kind of what we inhale or what we ingest. Okay. So as you can see here throughout, we got the lymph nodes of the head, the principal lymph nodes of the head, some cervical lymph nodes, kind of submandibular, right under mandible, buccal lymph nodes, mandibular lymph nodes, infraorbital, right under the eye, parotid lymph node, right, occipital. So different sections of the body, we have these lymph nodes where we have the mature T cells, B cells, this lymphoid tissue that are going to fight off and kind of be our response against invasion of foreign substances. Okay. Here we have some principal lymph nodes of the thorax. As you can see here, our aortic arch. But throughout we have intercostal, so in between the ribs, lymph nodes, tracheobronchial lymph node, posterior mediastinal lymph node, the phrenic lymph node, the sternal lymph nodes. Okay, we have some lymph nodes in the upper limbs. Okay, we have subscapular lymph nodes, right? Pectoral lymph nodes, deltopectoral lymph nodes as well, lateral lymph nodes, and then in the abdomen and the pelvis as well. Superficial inguinal, external iliac, internal iliac, common iliac, lumbar lymph nodes, gastric lymph nodes. Okay. Now here in the abdomen, so we're getting to the abdomen and kind of like the pelvis, inferior mesenteric lymph nodes, transverse mesocolic lymph nodes. Okay. And then of the lower limbs, we have superficial inguinal lymph nodes, okay, deep inguinal lymph nodes as well. Okay, so now the development of these lymphoid tissues, okay? So those lymphatic vessels, kind of how they're being made, so will develop from lymph sacs that are made from developing veins. And then those lymph sacs will develop into those jugular lymph sacs, and then into those retroperitoneal lymph sacs that will develop into a lymphatic vessel of kind of the abdomen and diaphragm. And then we have the cisternoculi, which develop into the inferior portion of the thoracic duct, and the cisternoculi of the thoracic duct. We have what are called the posterior lymphatic sacs, kind of be the lymphatic vessels of the abdominal wall, mesenchymal cells. Okay, so those are converted into groups of lymph nodes. Okay, so those are the mesenchymal cells will then become those lymph nodes. These will all become like vessels throughout. Okay, and then the thymus will develop from this third pharyngeal pouch. So kind of these different sections that are before through development, and then eventually will come vessels, will come lymph nodes, and a thymus. Okay, and that was it. Well, it was fast. So yeah. Okay, make sure you watch the videos, the heart, the vessels. There's a couple little more questions this time on the test. There's 5 essay questions near the end. So make sure you have enough time for the last ones, okay? See you in class.